And our next game is Chrono Trigger. It was published and developed by Square before they were Square Enix or even Squaresoft, I think. Were they just called Square? Okay, and it was released on the Super Nintendo, which, it's Chrono Trigger. Probably everyone knows at least that particular piece of information. The earliest release date in territory was March 11th, 1995, and I guess that's Japan? You guys are killing me here.
For Japan, yes.
And that was nominated by Gaelic Rocks. All right, go Gaelics.
Aaron go Brock. Or however. I know like almost nothing in Gaelic, so it's Irish, old Irish.
Yes. So yeah, this is a huge game by reputation. It precedes itself completely in every way. It's often considered one of the best games ever made. I'm not jumping ahead of myself here. This is go type best game all ever's lists, and Chrono Trigger will be somewhere in those quite consistently.
It's rare to not see it in the top 5.
Yeah,
I'd be willing to believe it's one of the best JRPGs for certain.
My one-line review of Chrono Trigger remains: it's a JRPG for people that want to finish a JRPG.
Ouch. Well, no, that's certainly in its favor. Even that sounds minorly condescending, also. But
that's right.
Oh, geez, how do we even tackle this one? I mean, if we blow it, we're going to get crapped on by the fans forever. So.
I think that a good way to kind of think about Chrono Trigger a lot of time is it seems to me, again, that as far as JRPGs go, it goes against a lot of JRPG conventions. In that, again, it's kind of a much shorter, much more fast-paced game. It doesn't seem to be as much of a grind. There's a lot of stuff. The battle system and such is completely different and considered a bit more real-time than, or has that sort of feeling while still being turn-based, almost kind of like a prelude to like the active time battle stuff. Yeah, there just seems to be so much different about it.
That is a very good point, and something I very much appreciate about this game. I admit I'm not a fan of the genre, because so much of it seems to be based around padding and kind of just artificially increasing the length. This is a game that doesn't waste your time. It always feels like you're making progress, and you're never just forced to just do things and just wait it out to make progress, and I like that for it.
Before we get way ahead of ourselves, we should probably at least tell people what the plot is. I know 90% of people at least have a vague idea, but let's tell people what Chrono Trigger is. You know, the name is pretty evocative, Chrono Trigger, but what does it mean? Why is it called Chrono Trigger?
Because it's about time travel. So basically it starts this kid named Chrono who goes to a science fair, and somebody else developed this one name.
The scientist? Lucca, that's her name, I think.
Yes, she lives on the second floor. I had to go there, Jesus. Oh, the exact details of the plot are not exactly known to me, but it's like a princess and like Chrono's cool inventor friend are like at this fair, and they go into the forest, and then like, you know, she and he get convicted, they go to jail, but then they bust out, find some sort of giant time wormhole, get like a medieval
You forgot the part, they go back in time before that. Come on, look at this guy, doesn't even remember the Chrono Trigger plot. It's almost like he didn't play it in the last like week or something.
Hey, don't be a dick here. I'm going to have to...
No, I mean... You didn't replay this. You have played this game before. You're not some asshole who's making stuff up. You just haven't replayed it recently, just so that we're on this page. So they go. Lucca invents a teleporter, and then they accidentally go through time instead of getting teleported via a magic necklace that Princess has, who you don't know is a princess exactly when that happens. There's some shenanigans, and they end up discovering that in the year 1999, the world is destroyed by a giant hell beast monster creature that eats the whole planet or something gradually.
Wow,
called
Prince was
Lavos.
right. Oh, sorry. I had to get there.
So, first thing I would like to say is that it is probably one of the best audio-visual experiences on Super Nintendo. I mean, compared to most other RPGs at the time, nearly every playable character has a unique sprite instead of being based around a template. The area design, it has very naturalistic look to it rather than tile-based. Rather than
it's
obvious.
kind of culminating a lot of different sprite and visual styles that SNES games had tried, and then Square kind of put several of their previous games together and several other people's games together. Because, because it's semi-real time, it feels a little bit like Secret of Mana kind of jammed into a Squaresoft specific like Final Fantasy game. And then they kind of make it even more cinematic than any of those by incorporating a lot more richer in-game cutscenes, and the fight system no longer transitions to a magical fight arena. Now you're actually fighting in the exact screen that you meet enemies in, which I don't know if that's a first for a normal RPG. It's not a first for action RPGs, obviously, but it's a new sort of style for them. So the game feels very... not realistic, but everything feels like it takes place, where it's supposed to. You don't ever enter magical voids that don't really exist to fight giant, non-animated monsters. All the monsters are now animated on screen, and they actually walk, and they're all roughly the size of you, I think, for the most part. There's a few big monsters, but most of them are kind of within scale.
I'd like to talk about one other thing I really like about this game real quick, kind of going off what Cal said. Enemy encounters, like you said, you actually... I don't know if all the encounters are random. There's like certain points where you just find an encounter, but it never just feels like, oh, you have to stop what you're doing and fight now. It feels a lot more natural, because enemies might come out of somewhere on the map that makes sense, and that adds a lot.
Actually, there's just one part of this, Bobinator. Those encounters, those will be there every time you revisit that map.
Yes, the game doesn't remember, but on the upside, the game does refresh encounters in an area sometimes. So it changes what enemies are actually going to spawn the further you are into the game. I think it does that mostly when you're definitely going back through an area. Like, they force you to do it. They might retweak the enemies and who's going to spawn and stuff, which is nice. You're not really supposed to backtrack heaps and heaps in this game. It sounds kind of non-linear, because very early on you get given the ability to travel through time and go to certain key periods in the game universe's history. It seems like it's pretty open, but it's really not. It's actually still quite a linear game. It's just, it lets you go where you kind of want, but says you need to go to the past, because in the past they used magical items as currency, so you need some of that. Go get that. And you can go to the future again if you want, but it won't progress the plot. You have to go to the past to do the thing.
Now, not to bring in any major spoilers, but this does actually bring me to one problem I have with the game, is that there is a point where this kind of runs out, the whole narrative momentum, and you are pretty much left to your own devices to take on side quests to get strong enough to beat the final boss. And at that point, it just feels a lot less focused and directed than it was before.
Which makes sense, because they just kind of tell you to to get good so you can beat the boss, who is infamous for letting you fight the boss at any time, but you'll just die.
Yep, unless you're playing on, I don't know if I wanted to get ahead and explain the New Game Plus, but, after you do beat everything, and the final boss too, you can restart the game with everyone being as strong as they were when they beat the final boss, which means that if you do restarting this game, now everyone's all beefed up, if you decide to fight Lavos early on, you will get a different ending depending on what point of the game you're in, and this leads like 10 10 or so different endings than the normal one, which was considered a very novel and neato idea for its time. Some are goofier than others, some are more badass, and probably the biggest prize is if you can beat Lavos with just Chrono and Marley at the very beginning of the game, you get a special ending where you get to talk to the developers of the game, who are represented through all sorts of wacky sprites, and they talk about all sorts of various goofy stuff, and that's a pretty neat bonus. And I like how they encourage you to give the play a second time, because I think most RPGs, most people after they sunk 100 hours into them, they're like, I'm done, I'll move on from here. But no, hey, this one, once you come back for a second time, that's pretty cool, I will admit.
I wonder if it's one of the first games to do that, or maybe even the
I'm not 100% sure if it's the first game to have a new game plus ever, because I feel like someone could have accidentally made their game have a new game plus where they don't reset the variables or something for their character stuff. But it feels like the first game that really very consciously, deliberately put a lot of effort into a new game plus system, because it's not just your character stays strong or you get to keep your abilities. There's a whole wealth of other fun little endings, and it's one of the only acknowledgments I think in the game that time travel is maybe you could do something different, because it's basically saying, all right, well, maybe if you were strong enough, you could have beat the boss here, and then the ending changes. And it's wow, that's so cool that you can do that. I don't know if anyone would. Well, I guess people would have, because kids have infinite time, but replay the game to get every single conceivable ending would be a little crazy. I wouldn't do it, but I'm sure someone did, someone does. They added an ending, I think, to the DS version as well, because there was a DS port that was released.
Yeah, no, the port was liked for bringing Chrono Trigger to a new generation of people, although I think the stuff it added was considered of some questionableness. I don't know. I'll go ahead, James.
One thing, didn't it actually add the cutscene, the animated ones from the PlayStation port?
It did, yes.
Which actually has one problem, is that they simply depict scenes from the game itself, so it will typically show you this animated version of one of the game's highlights, and then continue to play out the original version of that scene.
Whoops. Yeah, I guess I couldn't fault them for being artistic in that case, but that is beating over the head a bit. But really, there is a lot to like about Chrono Trigger, graphically, for sound, for how relatively lean it is. I mean, it usually doesn't encourage a lot of grinding, and it is a very well-made package overall. But I'm going to go on record to say I've always found it a little overrated. I'm going to get so murdered for admitting that.
My biggest issue mainly comes from the battle system itself.
I can use some backup.
Basically Final Fantasy IV and on the world, with less character customization and a kind of half-assed positioning system. Some of your attacks have an area of effect that targets multiple enemies. But since there's no way to really manipulate where enemies will be on the field, it kind of becomes just this goofy little Easter egg that doesn't...
Yeah, that is one thing. The game seems to act like the positioning of yourself and enemies matters, but it's kind of just random where the enemies move, and since you can't move, it's just kind of hoping they end up in the exact place you want them to be.
I want to say maybe, the ideal of that might have been borrowed from the semi-real-time battle system of a prior Square game, Secret of Mana, one of my personal favorites, by the way. But, the fact that you're not able to move at all does kind of make it a crapshoot, and I've always found that kind of annoying. And this is just me on one further note being petty. This is total preference, but the music is certainly good, but I was never the biggest fan of the soundtrack either. I'm sorry.
That's the one thing that you should get hung for. I think. You just
fine.
Nice.
It's a great soundtrack. I just, I don't know. I've always liked Uematsu more than Mitsuda. Okay, this is just me being personally. It's all down to preference. Okay, I'll admit.
Being loud doesn't make you right.
I think I heard Kim say something. If you'd like to step in.
Sorry, Kim. Go ahead, please. Oh,
I thought I heard you say something.
That the soundtrack was awesome. What are you doing?
I know, I'm bad. I suck. I didn't grow up on this game as lots of other people have. I don't have as much nostalgic sentiment for it, so it is a really fantastic game. I just want to rattle the cages a bit, that's all. But I will legitimately say, though, that I think the game's difficulty is mostly accommodating, except for the fight against Magus midway in the game, which is just such a horrible spike. It feels like the only part where grinding is necessary to be anywhere near powerful enough to deal with his barrier-changing bullshit. And it just really infuriated me. But, you know, maybe other people knew better and I was just doing it wrong, so...
Well, if we're getting ready to rank, I think the difficult part will be deciding if this goes above or below Earthbound, because honestly, I think I prefer Earthbound a little more.
Me too.
In some ways, it's maybe not... I'd say Chrono Trigger does have the edge in the way that its combat works, aside from a few nice features Earthbound offers, but Earthbound has an interesting setting, and it's got the goofy humor, and that means a lot to me, personally.
I mean,
but were we going to say anything more about Chrono Trigger? Because there's quite a few things to say about it.
Yeah.
I think. You know,
there's some neat little side quests in the end that make use of the time travel mechanic. Like, for example, you can get this weakened version of some of the game's best armor in the past, or you can go to a slightly more difficult sequence in the future to get an even better version of it.
I remember that. That was pretty neat. There's also one where you only have a single chance to do it unless you save in advance, but you do get to save Lucca's mother from being crippled, which is a pretty nice thing you can do, and there's like a cute little thing at the end where she's like dancing with her husband. But I think I like blew it the first time, and I'm like, oh god, no, so I did feel a little bit of a moral gravity there, but, you know, the magic of save stating and that this is a video game is certainly to your advantage. Although if you want to do, like, the Telltale thing and live with your consequences of messing up, you can do that too if you don't mind. Interesting that a game has something like this. This is actually pretty powerful. But, yeah, there is a lot to do around what seems like I don't want to call it the post-game, but, like, the pre-game, post-game, let's call it that. Not as expansive as when Final Fantasy VI gets into its world of ruin, but it is sort of like that same catch where the game becomes more freeform and there's stuff to do to become more powerful. Although I will say the Son of Sun boss fight is total bullshit if anybody knows that one, but other than that, it's all quite manageable. So I do actually like this game. I'm just not the biggest fan of it. Okay, I feel like I'm getting everyone all stone-faced because I admitted I'm not. Jeez.
Well, when your criticisms are just insane, it's hard to say anything about your. No, I mean, look, this game, I think it is overrated, but that's not really because it's a bad game. It's because it may not be the best game that's ever been made ever in the history of games. Maybe that was very close to true in 1997-ish, 1998, because it was really cool to hate Final Fantasy VII, you know. If you didn't... Hey, it was the 90s. It was if you didn't like things, you were cool.
Didn't we still kind of hate FF7 when we ranked? I mean, it landed highly.
No, turns out they were right. But that's not the point. The point is that Chrono Trigger was just a very, very popular game. It was very good, and it's a tough one to deny. I think that it has a lot of culmination of elements that basically do make it feel like one of the best SNES RPGs, and that's a pretty high praise because it is the RPG system in a lot of ways, because they made a whole bunch of, and it really is Squaresoft at close to their best. This is, this is when they still were able to experiment and make changes to an RPG formula They settled on a lot of styles and themes that they didn't necessarily need to keep in the future, but they just stuck to it because that seemed to be working. Whereas Chrono Trigger is like, we made Final Fantasy VI, that's done, that's cool. Let's make something else. Let's make something a little different. We'll make the battle style a little different. We'll make the plot a little different. We'll get the guy that makes Dragon Ball to draw us really ugly character portraits, because that's...
Hey, wait, Cal, that reminds me, wasn't like the only criticism you had about this game was that you hated Marley?
I don't like her attitude. It's far too upbeat for me.
That's fair. It is kind of hard to say anything too bad about this game. I mean, I'm just being incredibly nitpicky. But it is going to go pretty high. Although I will say, with Bob, I wouldn't rank it higher than Earthbound. Personally, others might. This is where you get into like the god tier of RPGs of all time. So this is going to be pretty tricky to decide.
Okay, so before we jump off, Kim, do you have any experiences with Chrono Trigger you'd like to share? I know you're not the hugest fan, but
I haven't played it for a long time. It's one of those games that's again kind of been on the backlog for some years. It's again, as I kind of said before, it's I do find it to be a really enjoyable JRPG just because it kind of bucks a lot of the different trends that there used to be in RPGs back then, and perhaps still are now. Another thing that I kind of found about it, like again, which probably come into like giving it a rank, is that it still feels like quite a modern game to me, like more so than a lot of other RPGs do at the time.
I would agree with that.
Feels like a big influence.
Hey, now this almost does seem like something that could be put on Steam today. In fact, I think the indie game I Am Setsuna drew some comparisons in structure to Chrono Trigger, so...
I think it helps they put it on the DS, and it probably didn't feel that outdated even on the DS.
Good point.
I don't know if the DS version made use of the DS's dual screen capacity, because they were big on that, but I don't think it did. I think it was just a regular game. I didn't play the DS version, sorry everyone.
That's fair. I own it, I haven't broken into it, but, despite my misgivings of the game, I would definitely like to play it again. I don't think it's flawless, but it is pretty god dang good. TheGunheart, is there anything else that you wanted to say about it?
I just want to say that I think it's probably one of the best overall cinematic experiences of the 16-bit era, but I'm still not that fond of it as an actual game due to the aforementioned issues with the character customization and battle system.
True.
I think the interesting thing about those two elements is I think they are what propel it in a lot of people's minds to the front, because it's approachable and it doesn't expect you to learn a shed load of systems. It's a double-edged sword where, like, on the one hand, yeah, it is simple and it is approachable. On the other, I think GH and I wanted something just a little bit more complex, and at least that's personally why I like Final Fantasy 5 and 6 more, because the job system and the espers and all that, allowing for the characters to be made more how you want them to be made. But yeah, like I said, double-edged sword. That this game is, I think, one of the most approachable RPGs, is probably its biggest credit. It's a pretty big credit back in the period before the internet was kind of around, this one.
That's another
you could
good
actually
point,
finish it at the time. Yeah, you didn't have to go buy the Nintendo Power exclusive walkthrough guide and tips to all the secrets. But there were plenty of secrets and side quests that you could dig around to, which I think is another thing that was very cool. Is that there's lots of like niceties in it that, again, this game, and I will move this into ranking this, but this game is full of elements that games would pick up on and would regurgitate into the future. Games would get more cinematic, they would get more streamlined, they would fill themselves with more completely pointless content that you can just find and do if you want. And Chrono Trigger very much was at the very start of that in terms of Square moving to developing games that were much more appealing to everyone, rather than people who just really wanted a JRPG, a Squaresoft RPG. Dragon's Quest is dead. Long live Chrono Trigger. That's the Chrono Trigger period.
I guess it kind of was, actually. Toriyama and all.
that being said, you guys keep saying Earthbound. I don't know if it's going to all make the cut, but you keep saying, I think it's better than Earthbound, or I think it's worse than Earthbound. I think everyone said it's worse than Earthbound. So I do think it's probably, it is that high. Like, that's where you guys are interested in putting Chrono Trigger.
There. Yeah, but a couple of clicks lower.
I'm unsure if I put it above or below, so I'm going to let everyone else have their say on that first.
Well, on personal opinion, I wouldn't put it above Toe Jam and Earl, so I'd go for number 15.
That's a good
That's a good place to start.
No, actually, I liked it quite a bit.
That's a good place to end.
So, between Toe Jam and Earl and Donkey Kong?
Okay. I'm okay with that if everyone else agrees.
All right.
Okay, cool. We did it. That was great. Thank you. That was the best ranking we've ever done. That's it, Chrono Trigger. Thank you.
Wow.
Thanks, Kim. That was
precise.
That was easy.
All right.
I was worried we were going to be here a while, but no. Thank goodness Darkseas isn't here. He would have, I don't know what he would have done, but he may have kept us here for ages trying to push it lower or higher. I have no idea, but
probably
sucks to be him.